So Robert, Brook Jackson files a qui tam fraud lawsuit alleging that the trials conducted by Pfizer in the development of the COVID-19 jibby jab were fraudulent, scandalous, totally compromised. They were totally unscientific and garbage, but they got to the results anyhow by fudging their numbers, yada, yada, yada. Qui tam is fraud on behalf of the state when the state doesn't take it, and she's taking this action on behalf of the state that should be taking it but doesn't. It goes on through the court system for a couple of years at least.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So, I mean, she brought this to the Justice Department's attention while President Trump was still president. And so to take people back, the Pfizer vaccine received its emergency use authorization based on the Defense Department approving a particular contract with Pfizer. What did President Trump's contract require? What was the deliverable, as they say in contract terms? It was that Pfizer promised they would deliver a safe, effective vaccine for the prevention of COVID-19 at speed and scale. In fact, they promised to deliver it prior to Election Day 2020. They actually had it available prior to Election Day 2020, but they hid that from President Trump because they didn't want President Trump to profit from it on Election Day.
I remember it. It was, they waited until after the election in order to say we've got a working vaccine. Then everyone was like, they got around the fact that no one would ever take a Trump vaccine. And when it was being sold as something that was going to be good and functional and the fruits of the Operation Warp Speed, we were at the time saying that's dirty to wait for Trump to be out of office, because had they disclosed it before, he might have gotten reelected, which would have ultimately turned into a bad thing 4 years later. But sorry, go ahead.
Well, it would have been a bad thing for Pfizer. And that was, why did Pfizer sandbag the Trump administration and delay the announcement of the production of the COVID-19 vaccine? Because they didn't want President Trump to hold them to their contract. As people around the world are discovering, Trump's going to hold you to account when it concerns American interest. And Pfizer didn't want to be held to account because they already knew, based on what Brook Jackson had disclosed to Pfizer internally, that Pfizer's clinical testing was so radically inadequate that it could not be any form of scientific basis to make any claim that the COVID vaccine was even a vaccine, least of all safe or effective or could prevent COVID-19 transmission or infection, and that they couldn't, in fact, produce it at speed and scale, and that was, in fact, part of the problem with their clinical testing, was attempting to do it at speed and scale in ways that no vaccine had ever been approved in that time frame. The second aspect was Pfizer knew President Trump would never mandate it. And they knew the only way they were going to line their pockets with this vaccine, so-called vaccine, because it was just a drug, a therapeutic. In fact, in the contract, it just says a vaccine is what we're paying for. That prevents the infection and transmission. It's right in the contract. They're saying we're not paying for a therapeutic. So you see these fake doctors like Neil Stone and some of these other frauds that are out there attacking Bobby Kennedy. And they're out there saying, oh, this was a great vaccine. It wasn't even a vaccine, you fraud. So it wasn't a vaccine. It wasn't effective because it didn't prevent any degree of transmission or infection. In fact, it had negative efficacy. What is that? It meant the more you took it, the more likely you were to get COVID. Worst vaccine in history. And it sure wasn't safe. Pfizer's most recent list is like 25 different side effects, severe side effects you can get from the vaccine. They knew that at the time. But they knew President Biden wouldn't hold them to account. They knew President Biden would force it on the world because of his tight ties to Bill Gates and George Soros, who are big fans of medical experimentation on the American public. George Soros, Bill Gates, from his old paternal legacy of supporting eugenics, and George Soros, who was tutored by the greatest oppressive force in the history of humankind, the Nazis, who he gladly was the Godfather recipient of, the sort of honorary grandson of, when he went around, hey, you steal that guy's stuff. Hey, steal that guy's stuff. And it never got out of old George's bloodstream. That Nazi instinct. She goes in the fall of 2020 and blows the whistle to the Justice Department, blows the whistle to the Food and Drug Administration. What happens? The same day she blows the whistle to the FDA, Pfizer, through Ventavia, her direct clinical trial employer, fire her. The court wouldn't even allow her to pursue her retaliation claim. That's how nuts the opinion was.
The reason given for her immediate dismissal?
They had she wasn't a good fit. And it's like, oh, what does that mean? What is it? This is someone with an impeccable record, Brook Jackson, impeccable record in the pharmaceutical clinical testing arena. It's what she was hired to do. She'd been doing it for a decade plus. And so the idea that she wasn't a good fit, no, if she wasn't a good fit, if what you were doing was fraudulent, that's what she wasn't a good fit for. And is it a coincidence? She talks to the FDA in the morning and she's fired by afternoon? Come on. And not only that, she got direct contacts from Pfizer on a phone that was only known to the FBI. I mean, to the FDA, rather. So then the Justice Department gets involved. Then the FBI gets involved. They're promising, oh, they're going to do meaningful reviews. They're going to stop this, they're just lying their rears off because Bill Barr doesn't want Trump to know about this. So Bill Barr hides this from Trump for the entire time frame. So then about almost a year into this whole process, she reaches out to me through a range of people, and I end up looking at the case and see what's happening. It's like, oh, they're just trying to hide this from the world. They're not seriously investigating this. That's hogwash. So we publicly disclose the suit, ask for it to be unsealed. It's unsealed. We get the British Medical Journal, one of the most well-respected medical journals in the world, to independently vet and validate her allegations. They publish an article that goes global through Europe but gets suppressed in the United States, saying that what she is saying is absolutely true and accurate, and that these clinical tests cannot be trusted, and that this drug cannot be marketed as either safe, effective, or even a vaccine, given it's none of those at all. So we bring suit because this is a massive fraud on the American people that has caused injury to millions of people around the world, including millions of people in America, including death, including disability, including discrimination, including severe injury. The government, at the very last minute, it looks like we're going to prevail and get to discovery. The Biden administration, at the very last minute, intervenes and demands dismissal.
This is how many years into the litigation? Just so people understand this.
Years into the litigation.
And how many dollars? I mean, this is now hundreds of thousands, if not.
I mean, in terms of legal time of everybody on behalf of Brook Jackson, millions. You're talking about millions of dollars.
And so they come in and they say, we're now intervening. We chose not to intervene at any stage earlier than this. We let you waste time, money, investigate, etc.
And lie and say you support the case, you back the case, you're investigating the case, none of which they were really doing.
And they come in and their intervention is to kill the Ketam case.
Correct. And their only ground, they cite no evidence. Not a single affidavit or declaration gets signed. They produce zero sworn testimony from anybody in support of it. They say, Judge, we're the United States government, so we get to have a monopoly over Ketam. We ask that you allow us to intervene so we can move to dismiss, and we demand that you provide no evidentiary hearing of any kind for this. We demand you have no discovery of any kind for this. We demand that you require no evidence be produced for this. We require that you don't even disclose a legally found sound reason for this. We just want to do it, and if we want to do it, that's enough, and it's against national health policy to question it. And they took it a step further. They said they didn't like Brook Jackson's public speech, so they would like the judge to punish her for her public speech, raising alarms around this issue. And again, remember, what was the Surgeon General doing at the same time? The Biden Surgeon General? He was demanding Facebook censor accurate, truthful information about injuries related to the vaccines. He was demanding they don't allow anybody to know that the vaccines are causing problems. This wasn't challenging misinformation. This was challenging accurate information that they started labeling malinformation. We watched 1984 a couple of weeks back at Viva Barnes Law. .locals.com is a Saturday movie night live chat. And it was amazing watching. I was like, this is COVID. This like predicts everything in COVID. All this crazy Orwellian language. The newspeak and, all the things that happened or didn't happen, the gaslighting en masse. And so she brings suit. They intervene at the last minute. The judge says no evidence is required. No reason is really required. Nothing legally sufficient is required that has traditionally been required. You can just dismiss the case because the government declares so, which would completely reverse the 1986 amendments passed by Senator Grassley. Senator Grassley is kind of the father of the modern Ketam laws. And he established he didn't trust the government to always do what's right. And he said, from the beginning of our Ketam laws, we've always allowed private citizens to be private attorney generals because the government sometimes is in on the very fraud that is being exposed. This is a case. These claims are not owned by the government. It's the same problem the Trump administration, the judges are getting with the bureaucracy. The government is the American people. There is no bureaucracy independent of the American people that has any legitimate authority of any kind. So it isn't what the government wants. It's what is in the interest of the American people. And that's what the Keatam laws were designed, was to protect the American people, often from corrupt actors in the government that are mishandling the people's money. Because that's what it's all about. It's about recovering the people's money back to the people.
I want to just bring up, speaking of 1984, Robert, something that you might be thinking of, a quote from the book. And when you watch AOC and other people on the internet, Winston had disliked her from the very moment of seeing her. He knew the reason. It was because of the atmosphere of hockey fields and cold baths and community hikes in general clean-mindedness, which she managed to carry about her. He disliked nearly all women, and especially the young and pretty ones. It was always the women, and above all the young ones, who were the most bigoted adherents of the party, the swallowers of slogans, the amateur spies and nosers out of unorthodoxy. George Orwell.
No doubt. And so we made the argument. The district court dismisses, says he's just a rubber stamp for the government. And so it goes up to the Fifth Circuit. But remember, the only grounds the government asserted was that it was against the Biden administration's public policy to second-guess the vaccines. Not that there was anything wrong in any of her allegations. Not that there was anything factually or legally insufficient in them. Not that it was a negative use of government resources for the case to be investigated. Clearly not, given the amount of recovery that was available to it, billions and billions of dollars. And so, what's millions of dollars against recovery in the billions of dollars. And so they couldn't even make that argument, and they didn't even try. And so our argument to the Court of Appeals is this is inadequate for intervention. There's what's called an intervention procedure under the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. It requires good cause. Having been on the receiving end of that, I know that good cause is usually held as a high standard.
But also good cause and also timeliness. Like, is there not a tacit renunciation?
If it's late, you have to have good cause. You don't have to have good cause at the beginning.
Okay.
Because at the beginning you have a broad right to intervene. But when you don't use that time frame to intervene, and the other parties vest expectations in that fact, then you have to have good cause to justify it belatedly. The judge said, no, you don't. The good cause is just the government wanting to do what it wants to do. Even though it was a Trump appointee, the guy had coward tattooed on his forehead. That's what I've said about him repeatedly. He doesn't like it. That's how I feel about his opinions. I think they're cowardly opinions. I think someone Trump regrets appointing. So you're not on the bench to cower to the corruption of the executive branch in the Biden administration, but he did. So but now the issue is the Health and Human. The policy they cited was the policy of the Biden administration Secretary of Health and Human Services. Clearly, the policy of the Health and Human Services has now changed. Robert Francis Kennedy Jr. is now the appointee and the confirmed secretary of that agency. And clearly, from his prior public statements, he does not share the opinion that we should be completely deferential and not question vaccines anywhere, especially a drug that's not even a vaccine.
But no, so which figurehead holds the power to reverse or change course? Is it HHS or the DOJ?
Oh, multiple. So President Trump has the power to do it. Vice President Vance could have influence in that regard. Then Attorney General Bondi has influence. The Robert Kennedy at HHS has influence. And the FDA commissioner, the newly appointed FDA commissioner, will have influence. These are the people whose decisions were being weighed at the time of national policy. They cited Biden, they cited Harris, and they cited the HHS and the FDA. And that was the Justice Department doing it. So those are the five actors that said this is why the case has to be dismissed. All five now have a different opinion than their Biden predecessors. All five believe you should be able to challenge and question government corruption at any level. That you should have a right to challenge whether a drug actually is a vaccine, whether it actually is safe, whether it is effective, whether it works for you as an individual. And they believe in consent, which was always supposed to be required, informed consent as part of the EUA statute, but it was one that the Biden administration just ignored. And so the question to me is, I think somebody in the Justice Department is hiding the existence of this appeal from Robert Kennedy, from Attorney General Bondi, from President Trump, from Vice President Vance, and from the FDA commissioner. And because their position is now directly opposite. So what makes sense for them to do is to tell the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals they support Brook Jackson's complaint and want the case reinstated, not dismissed. And then that will put major pressure on the Fifth Circuit to allow the case to go forward. And they have two options. They could step in. Well, they have three options, technically. They could continue to support what Biden administration did. That would be directly contrary to their public statements and to why they got elected. Second, they could intervened for the purposes of saying this case should not be dismissed, the case should be reinstated. We support its reinstatement, but we're going to let Brook Jackson take the lead on the litigation, and the government itself is not going to step in and take over. Or part three, the government could step in and take over and say, we're going to decide what really happened here. We're going to investigate what really happened here. We're going to pursue this case into discovery and to figure out what fully happened. And that's what Bondi and Kennedy and Trump at various points have supported in one way, shape, or form. Is to look at all drugs in this capacity, not just the COVID-19 drug, but it's been the most controversial in this context in terms of its injuries and that it's inflicted on the American people and people around the world. So it's going to be up. So hopefully somebody can get the attention of Attorney General Bondi and their key deputies, of Secretary Kennedy, of President Trump, and Vice President Vance to look at this case and say, hold on a second. Is it consistent with our current policy for this case to be dismissed because we don't agree with the Biden administration's policy that no vaccine should ever be questioned and no fraud ever exposed?
Now you made me think about this, and I just went back to find the select subcommittee report. The Brook Jackson didn't come up in the sub-select committee's report on the investigation to the COVID pandemic. How do you get that to their attention? Or I presume they're still.
I know Secretary. I think there are senators that need to bring it to attention. I know Senator Johnson's team has been interested in making sure this case goes further. I know Senator Grassley is deeply concerned about what the precedent it's setting that would eviscerate whistleblower claims. No whistleblower is going to go forward if they know that the government can, at the very last minute, pull the rug out from underneath them, like they did in Brook Jackson's case. So if Senator Grassley cares about key TAM actions and he wants to restore key TAM legitimacy, reversing this case has got to be one of his top priorities. So, and then I know Senator Paul has wanted full investigation to take place here. So there are senators that have called for this and supported Brook Jackson's case. Congressmen like Thomas Massey that have supported Brook Jackson's case. The question is, does the newly confirmed appointees of the Trump administration, President Trump himself, know about this? I don't think he does. I think they hid it from him the entire time he was president the first time, and I think they're hiding it from him now. I think the Justice Department officials working this particular brief, what they're going to do are not telling Kennedy about it. They're not telling Bondi about it. They're not telling Trump about it, and they should, because the entire premise of the dismissal of Brook Jackson is now gone. The entire premise was the national policy of the Biden administration was to not question the safety or efficacy of vaccines. That is not the policy of the Trump administration. In fact, it's just the opposite.
Well, now I can't share screen again, so I'll have to refresh my computer, but I'm just pulling up an article from September where Kathy Hochul is still encouraging New Yorkers to get the COVID-19 vaccine. I mean,
there's 15 colleges that still mandate it.
Yeah. So, I mean, is there not a political or financial reason, but from a state perspective, there's a vested interest to never look into it, to never discover the problems, because if and when they ever discover these things, will there be liability at the state level for institutions that require this and continue to require it several years into the key TAM lawsuit itself?
Well, I mean, that's where Trump did a great act by saying no more federal funding to anybody mandating the vaccine. So that's going to solve 95% of that problem. There's still 5% out there, like subcontractors and contractors, that need to be included in reinstatement as a condition of federal funding. That you need to tell everybody, okay, if you want, there's a bunch of contractors that only fired people because they were forced to by the Biden administration. So that those are people that should be put into a position where they are back reinstated and allowed to take position. So that, there's other areas of this that continue to need relief and remedy. Multiple states are looking at banning mRNA vaccines going forward because of the problems with mRNA, particularly as a vaccine delivery mechanism that caused a lot of the injuries and illness in this respect. But and all we're asking is let us see the discovery and try the case in front of a court that's hostile to us. So it's not like we're asking for the world. We're just saying we're not even asking for demanding the government take over the case. So I think that's what they should do. It's just, let us continue to prosecute the case and see whether we're right or not. If Pfizer is right that this is such a safe, effective, wonderful vaccine, then by golly, they should be eager to prove it to the world in front of a jury and a judge, with a jury that's predisposed to them and a judge that's predisposed to them based on the court of public opinion. And so yet they're terrified to even allow discovery because they know what they did was they lied to President Trump, rug pulled President Trump, ambushed and sabotaged President Trump so that they could force this dangerous drug on the American people to enrich themselves. Everybody knows that's what happened. Several of the Justice Department people I've affiliated with demanding the dismissal have ties to Big Pharma, either in their past or now going back to jobs related to Big Pharma. So they were compromised. People at the FDA were compromised. People at CDC were compromised. People at HHS were compromised. People in the Biden administration were compromised. So this is a compelling case for restoring confidence in key TAM claims for Senator Grassley, critical to Senator Johnson and Senator Paul to get to the bottom of what really happened with the COVID vaccine, and critical to President Trump wanting to restore money to the budget. Did these people lie to him? Did these people hoodwink him as well as the American people?
Mm-hmm.
If so, shouldn't there be a consequence? Pfizer's people are telling President Trump it's a wonderful drug. Well, why not prove it in front of a judge and a jury then? That's all we're asking for. We're asking for the law to be followed. We'll see whether these, I think, rogue Justice Department lawyers keep this information hidden from President Trump and Secretary Kennedy and Attorney General Bondi, or if they get word of it and take the action that needs to be taken, which is that the national policy has now changed, and it's to allow the court to know we don't support the dismissal that took place before. We support the case being reinstated because it is not the policy of the Trump administration to ignore the dangers of any drug, whether it's labeled a vaccine or not.
And the issues, well, we won't go into it, but it's highlighted in the vivabarneslaw.locals.com community, whether the district erred in granting the DOJ's motion for permissive intervention to dismiss the key TAM case, whether they failed to demonstrate good cause, violated constitutional principles, whether the order of dismissal with prejudice as to relator should be vacated on the grounds that the DOJ failed to articulate a constitutionally firm and reasonably grounded argument as to why the burdens from litigation outweigh its benefits, whether the district court abused of its discretion in entering dismissal of the key TAM with prejudice as relator, and whether de novo review, the order dismissing Brook Jackson's retaliation claim must be vacated, whether she pleaded sufficient facts stating a claim that she was unlawfully terminated from her employment because of her efforts to stop one or more violations. It's such a no-brainer, and not just because I'm biased. I'm biased because it's a no-brainer and she's right. And it is interesting now that you got Fauci getting pardoned on his way out the door. This would, but not Bourla or any of the Pfizer, the pharma types. So I didn't realize their stock is now at like 40% of what it was at the peak in 2022 when they.
Well, yeah, and that's great credit to Children's Health Defense and great credit to Brook Jackson, who pursued difficult cases in the courts of law, knowing the hostility to both judges and the federal government to pursuit of these cases. That in the process of using the court of public opinion to use the court of laws to educate the court of public opinion. And consequently, I think if Brook Jackson doesn't go public with her case, we get nowhere near the level of public attention to the issues involved. And the public attention, what did it lead to? It led to a dramatic reduction in the number of children, especially, who took this drug. And there's no question that Brook Jackson's already saved the lives of millions of people around the world by going public with these disclosures, even though it ruined her career. Destroyed any chance at any kind, and put her subject to a massive macro and microscopic attention of very powerful institutions, including Pfizer, the biggest criminal drug dealer in American history. Pfizer, remember that, everybody. That's who Pfizer is. But
it's a matter of fact. Just go look up the top civil criminal penalties paid.
It's more dangerous to expose Pfizer than it is to expose the Sonoma drug cartel. That's the reality of the world. I mean, it might be a little more dangerous to expose Boeing. I'm just saying. The Clintons. That was the amazing thing. Like with Trump, all of his criminal cases, nobody magically died during any of the cases against Trump. Unlike, you can't say that. Can you say about the Clintons? Can you say that about Boeing? You can't even say that about Pfizer.
You can't even say that about Kevin Spacey. But Robert, you did mention someone's name earlier in the show. Dr. Neil Stone. Like, I don't understand who this guy is. I got to show you this. Just we'll go through. Infectious disease doctor, clinician, scientist, officially the first person to use word COVID. Nice. Personal views of his own. Okay.
Which reminds me, I should, whenever you go to the doctor, double check if your infectious disease doctor, any of them has a social media fray, and see if they're a bunch of commies like this.
And
immediately say, no, thank you. I want a new doctor. I want a real doctor, not one who plays one on Twitter.
Listen to this beautiful medical tweet that he puts out. Rates of autism are the same in unvaccinated kids as in vaccinated kids. The vaccines aren't the cause. There, I've saved RFK Jr. a lot of time and effort. He posted a link to a study that was from 2002 that was a retrospective cohort of Denmarkian children from 91 to 98. And I asked, I was like, the study is 20 years old. The data was 10 years old in the study. And it only related to
and
MMR.
There were major problems with the study, in the way that the study was done. I mean, this schmuck was going around using the old bogus CDC charts about how the unvaccinated were more likely to get COVID than the vaccinated, not realizing that chart has long been exposed. This was part of the Brook Jackson case. They were listing vaccinated people as unvaccinated if they got COVID during a certain time frame of when they got the vaccine.
It's an amazing
It's totally fake. This is a fake. There's a doctor putting out fraudulent data, fraudulent information, and it's routine in the entire medical establishment.
It's amazing because you would get your first shot. One of the adverse events was actually getting COVID. If you got COVID after your first shot, you weren't considered fully vaccinated, and therefore they said that it was an unvaccinated case of COVID.
Or if you suffered debilitating injury or disease from the vaccine itself within 3 weeks, and you suffered death, you were considered an unvaccinated death, even though it was the vaccine that caused your death. That was the degree of fraud they were engaged in. It was very similar to Samoan measles case that they lied about Kennedy connected to. It was a vaccine that caused the injuries and death. It was a contaminated vaccine. And so that's why this case is critical. If we're going to get any reform, any remedy, or any accountability, the way to do it is for the Trump administration to join this case. Not just reverse their national public policy, but join the case. Let's find out the truth together. The bottom line, President Trump designed a beautiful contract, maybe the greatest contract in the history of pharmaceutical contracts by the government, that required a safe, effective vaccine for the prevention of COVID-19, delivered at speed and scale prior to the election. They lied. It wasn't safe. It wasn't effective. It wasn't a vaccine. It didn't prevent COVID-19. And they didn't even deliver it by the date they promised to deliver it, just to screw over President Trump. President Trump should just get to the bottom of it. Is this vaccine even a vaccine? Is it safe? Is it effective? Did they deliver at speed and scale? Did they lie to the President of the United States? Are they a bunch of criminal frauds who belong in Guantanamo for forever? Let's have a meaningful investigation. Deliver on your promises to the American people. And the best way to do that is reinstate the Brook Jackson case against Pfizer.
Did she have any personal knowledge of the Maddie DeGarry situation? Maddie DeGarry was the kid who did the Pfizer
Not
trial.
That specific one. What she saw was a bunch of people suffering adverse events and them faking and fraudulently changing the data in the results.
No, like with Maddie DeGarry, she was one of the children, and they wrote off her transmyelitis. I forget exactly what it is, as a stomach issue, and then said it was psychological.
She was a healthy kid that takes the vaccine and ends up in a wheelchair. That's the bottom line as well. And Pfizer lied about it. And they're still hiding behind their PrEP Act immunity about it, which, by the way, the hospitals are all using the PrEP Act protection right now to deny people like Vice President Vance's niece access to needed medical care. That's something that Secretary Kennedy, now confirmed Secretary Kennedy, can change at the Health and Human Services. And so that's something that he has publicly discussed during the campaign that he would do. I think you're going to discover that Robert Kennedy, like Donald Trump, are men of their word, and they're going to deliver. I think that ultimately you'll see them be curious about, make the world know, make the courts aware that their public policy has changed and they want the Brook Jackson case to go forward. But you saw President Trump, he's authorizing a broad commission. He wants the bottom line truth to be fully exposed, and he wants that commission to be headed by Robert Kennedy, because he wants somebody who has a nuanced and skeptical eye attuned to this. Someone who's not been captured and bought off by Big Pharma and Big Food to look at what's happening to our food supply, what's happening to our medicines, that we are being contaminated and killed off early and suffering a chronic disease level that we have never experienced in the history of our country. And so I think you'll see Tulsi Gabbard give honest intelligence information to the president. And this is the most reformist cabinet in the history of America, in my opinion. I don't think you can point to another cabinet in the history of the United States that is as reformist on core issues of the abuse of power of powerful institutions, private and public, than President Trump's cabinet. President Trump has kept his word. Now it's the time for everybody else to implement that word. And I think you're going to see that. I have great confidence in both Robert Kennedy and Tulsi Gabbard in that regard.
Let me just two shout outs of sorts. Kayla Pollock had her on the channel, rendered a quadriplegic. She's suing Moderna up in Canada because in Canada there's no PrEP Act immunity, but there's contractual indemnification. She's suing Moderna. I gave everybody the link to her fundraiser. And then you have Dan Hartman, Sean Hartman's father, who is suing Pfizer for the death of his son, who died 33 days after his first shot. And there was medical malpractice in that, in addition to pharmaceutical malpractice. This is the link. I put them in there. So if you want to support, just remember that they're still out there fighting the battle. All right, Robert. I mean, fingers crossed. It has to happen.
I mean, either way, we'll continue to fight for Brook Jackson. Either way, no matter what. But I think it's clear to me that the key people in the Justice Department and at the FDA are hiding this information from their superiors. Because I have no doubt I would be hearing from them if, in fact, and they would be making public corrections of the existing court record, because they know, the people that are running this case know that the current administration doesn't have the same national policy. And remember, that was the only reason for the dismissal. So that alone requires reversal of what the district court did and reinstatement of her case.